A black waitress is mocked for her scars until a veteran is shocked to recognize her unit's tattoo. "Look, Freddy Krueger is here to work today," Davidson yells, slamming his fist on the table and making the plates rattle. "Hey, monster, bring me more coffee, but be careful not to spill it with those burnt hands." The cruel laughter echoes through Ray's diner like an emergency siren. All eyes turn to Kesha, who holds the coffee pot with perfectly straight hands despite the scars that extend from her fingers until they disappear under the sleeve of her white uniform. Kesha Johnson was 34 years old, and she had endured far worse than the abuse from Davidson and his cadre of mediocre executives who showed up every Tuesday to cheer her up. What they didn't know was that every cruel word only fed something inside her that grew in silence, a power they could never understand. "I bet it was in a slum fire," Brett, Davidson's accountant, whispered, loud enough for her to hear. "Or maybe she was trying to cook crack and blew it up." Davidson laughed even harder. "Or maybe her boyfriend did it to her. You know how it is with domestic violence in this community." Kesha walked to the table with measured steps, her posture erect, a contrast to the expectation of seeing her hunched over under the weight of humiliation. Once she reached the table, she poured the coffee with surgical precision, every movement calculated and controlled. "Anything else, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice so calm that Davidson frowned, confused by the lack of the expected response. "Yes, an explanation." Davidson leaned forward, his small eyes blazing with malice. "Tell us how you got this. Was it bad luck, or did someone teach you a lesson?" For a split second, something flickered in Kesha's eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't shame. It was the look of someone who had stared death in the face and decided it would have to wait. But Davidson was too busy admiring his own cruelty to notice. "A job," she said simply, turning to leave. "What kind of job leaves a person like this?" Brett pressed, his voice thick with contempt. "A night guard, a prostitute." "Careful," Kesha interrupted, turning slowly to meet Brett's gaze. There was something about the way she said that one word that made the air at the table feel heavier. "Some stories are more dangerous to tell than you can imagine." Davidson laughed again, but this time it sounded a little forced. "Oh, look, monsters trying to scare us? What are you going to do? Burn us like you were burned?" What they all didn't realize was that as they talked, Kesha was memorizing every face, every name mentioned in their previous conversations, every detail of their lives that they had unknowingly revealed during these weekly sessions of brutality. Her military mind was working like an information processing machine, cataloging everything for a purpose they had never even dreamed of. Across the restaurant, a man in his 40s was watching the scene with growing discomfort. James Wright had arrived a few minutes early and chosen a table at the far end, hoping to have a quiet coffee while he was driving across the country. But the verbal brutality he'd witnessed made him sick. Something about Kesha's posture, the way she maintained her composure under intense fire, stirred a distant memory in James. There was something familiar about that calm under pressure, that unnatural cool that only existed in people who'd been in places where death was a real possibility. "If you like this story, be sure to subscribe," Kesha muttered under her breath as she wiped down a nearby table, a phrase that had become her personal mantra for maintaining her sanity. "Because you haven't seen anything this monster can do." There, under the fluorescent lights of a Texas diner, enduring indignities that would have broken most men, Kesha held a secret that could rewrite the history of these arrogant men. Because sometimes the most underestimated people are the ones who hold the most powerful secrets. Davidson wasn't satisfied with Kesha's evasive answers. In fact, her calm only made him more anxious to break the serenity that bothered him. There was something about her posture that challenged his sense of superiority, and it was unacceptable. "A job," Davidson repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What job, honey? Because from what I can see here, you serve coffee and bus tables. Not exactly dangerous jobs." Brett laughed, encouraged by his boss's persistence. "Maybe she worked at a barbecue joint and got burned, or a dry cleaner with chemicals. You know, jobs for people like her." Kesha stopped cleaning the table next to them. Her movements became more deliberate. When she turned to meet their eyes again, James Wright noticed something the others hadn't, a subtle change in the way she distributed her weight, as if she were preparing for something. "People like me?" Kesha asked, her voice still calm but with a new edge to it that made Davidson hesitate for a second. You know, Davidson quickly recovered. People who work with their hands, physical labor, nothing that requires too much brain activity. It was then that James noticed a detail that made his heart beat faster. As Kesha bent slightly to pick up the fallen napkin, the sleeve of her shirt rose a few inches, revealing not only the scars that ran down her arm, but the faded edge of a tattoo. It was only a few partial letters, but to someone who had served in the military, the markings were unmistakable. Interesting, Kesha murmured, more to herself than to Davidson. Physical labor. That's an interesting description of carrying wounded soldiers under enemy fire from 10 feet away. Davidson blinked, confused. What did you say? Nothing, Kesha replied, returning to her neutral tone. Forget it. Do you want the bill, or are you going to stand here all day commenting on my appearance? The sudden change in tone caught Davidson off guard, but it also made him more angry. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially by someone he considered beneath him in the social hierarchy. Listen up, little one. Davidson stood up from his chair, his voice rising. You're going to show us the respect we deserve. We're paying customers and you're just what? Kesha interrupted, turning fully to face him. For the first time since they'd arrived, she made direct eye contact with Davidson, and something in her gaze made him take an involuntary step back. James Wright watched the scene with mounting tension. There was something about the way Kesha stood, the way she held her arms open at her sides, that evoked memories of military training. She wasn't simply defending her dignity, she was assessing threats and calculating responses. You're just a waitress, Davidson finished, trying to regain his bravado. You're just a waitress. You can't answer me like that. Who are you to tell me anything? I'm just pointing out, Kesha straightened, returning to her professional tone. I'm just pointing out that sometimes people completely underestimate who they're dealing with, and by the time they realize their mistake, it's usually too late to do anything about it. Each new humiliation only strengthened something inside her that her oppressors couldn't see. A quiet strength, fueled by the very injustice they were trying to inflict on her. What these privileged men didn't know was that every act of contempt was writing their own death warrant, line upon line, cruel word upon cruel word. James Wright couldn't stay silent any longer. In 15 years of military service, he'd learned to recognize veterans even when they tried to hide. There was something in their posture, the way they assessed threats, their emotional control under pressure. And Kesha had it all. As Davidson sat back down, clearly pleased with his display of strength, James stood and walked to the counter. He ordered more coffee from the waiter, but his eyes were on Kesha, who had resumed her duties with an almost supernatural calm. Excuse me, James said quietly as she passed him. Can I talk to you for a minute? Kesha quickly assessed him. Veteran, probably Marine or Army. Respectful posture. Sure, but quick. I still have tables to wait on. That tattoo on your arm, James whispered. 1st Infantry Division. The big red one. Kesha's body tensed for a split second. You served? Marines? 2 rounds in Afghanistan, and you've clearly seen combat too. James glanced discreetly at Davidson, who was loudly telling a joke to Brett. These idiots have no idea who they're messing with, do they? Kesha allowed a small smile to touch her lips. No idea. A combat medic? James asked, noticing the precision with which she handled objects and the way she instinctively checked for injuries whenever someone took a hit. A combat trauma specialist. 3 tours in Iraq, and you're right about them not knowing who they're messing with. Kesha looked directly at James, but it wasn't time for them to find out yet. Meanwhile, Davidson decided that his public humiliation of Kesha was just beginning. He pulled out his phone and began recording. That's it, he said, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. I want you to see this. That's the monster serving us coffee. Just look at that burnt face. Kesha turned slowly, her eyes meeting the camera on her phone. But instead of the embarrassment Davidson expected, she simply smiled. A cold smile that sent chills down James's spine because he recognized the expression. It was the smile of someone who had decided the time had come for retribution. I've had experience, she said calmly. Davidson laughed, misinterpreting her calm. See, she actually likes the attention. I bet she's used to being filmed. She probably has an OnlyFans account for contortionist fetishists. It was then that James saw something that confirmed everything he had suspected. For just a moment, Kesha assessed Davidson with the look of a soldier calculating trajectories and impact points. It wasn't anger. It was pure tactical analysis. You know, Kesha said, walking up to Davidson's table, you're right about me being used to being filmed. I actually have a lot of experience with cameras. Davidson continued filming, excited by the attention. Oh yeah, tell me more about that experience. Well, Kesha pretended to think, I've been filmed receiving military medals. Medals for saving lives under enemy fire. Medals for bravery in combat. That kind of thing. The lie was so convincing that Davidson hesitated for a second, then laughed even harder. But some clients started paying attention. Kesha's posture, the way she talked about the medals with a specificity that didn't seem made up. James realized she was sowing doubt. I have experience, Kesha repeated. By the way, what's your full name? So when this video goes viral, people will know who's behind this masterpiece. Davidson Mitchell of Mitchell and Associates, he replied proudly. You can look it up online. Successful company, successful guy, filming a fired employee. Mitchell and Associates, Kesha repeated, memorizing. Interesting. What do you do? Business consulting. We help companies get rid of problem employees. Davidson looked at her pointedly. Employees who don't fit the company's image. James watched Kesha process this information with the efficiency of a military computer. He could almost see the gears turning in her head, cataloging not just names in the company, but probably already plotting strategies. Tony, Kesha called to the manager, who had retreated to the kitchen to avoid confrontation. Can you come here for a second? Tony appeared reluctantly. Kesha, please. We don't want any trouble. There won't be any trouble, she said calmly. I just want you to witness that Mr. Davidson Mitchell of Mitchell and Associates is voluntarily recording this video using my name and image and making specific comments about my appearance. Tony blinked, confused. Okay, thanks. And you, James. She turned to the veteran. Thanks for introducing yourself. Maybe we can talk more after my shift. Davidson was starting to get annoyed by Kesha's lack of emotional reaction. Hey, stop pretending you're in control. You're just a burnt-out waitress no one wants to see. You're right, Kesha agreed calmly. I'm just a waitress you clearly think is invisible, harmless, someone who goes unnoticed, watching and learning. Something in her tone made Davidson pause the recording for a moment. Learn what? Oh, you'd be surprised what an invisible person can hear during business conversations, especially when those conversations are happening at the same table every week for months on end. Kesha smiled again. But keep going with your video. I'm sure your customers will enjoy seeing how you treat people you consider beneath you. That's when Davidson realized he'd probably said too much over the past Tuesdays. Details of shady contracts, questionable practices, clients he'd helped fire employees for discriminatory reasons. All of it out loud in front of a mere waitress he'd deemed too insignificant to pose a threat. James saw the moment when Davidson's smugness began to crack, replaced by a hint of unease. And he also saw the moment when Kesha decided she had gathered enough information for now. Well, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. As always, she said, tucking her pen into her apron pocket. See you next Tuesday. Or maybe not. As she walked away, James realized that he had just witnessed the opening steps of a military campaign. Kesha wasn't just a veteran trying to survive in civilian life. She was a seasoned strategist who had just turned months of humiliation into ammunition for a war Davidson didn't even know he'd declared. For a moment, when she accepted the humiliation without resistance, everyone thought she had been broken. But those who know true military strength know that it grows precisely in silence, fueled by the patience and precision of those who have learned that the best revenge is the kind the enemy never sees coming. Davidson's phone began to ring insistently. It was Michael Stevens, his largest corporate client. Davidson answered with a smug smile, keeping the camera rolling. Davidson, you have something urgent to explain. Stevens' voice was tense. I've just received some very disturbing information about your company. What are you talking about, Michael? Davidson laughed, looking at Kesha as if she were part of the joke. The methods you use to fire employees based on questionable criteria, That's when Kesha came up to the table. Mr. Stevens, isn't that right? Your company was mentioned here a few times. Something about purging the workforce of undesirables were the words. Davidson went pale. Are you okay? 3 months ago, you explained in detail how you helped Stevens fire black employees under the guise of restructuring. Kesha continued calmly. You said the trick was to create retroactive performance documentation. They'd never be able to prove discrimination. That's a lie, Davidson shouted. A lie! Kesha smiled. Tony, can you get me my phone? The one with the recording app I've been using for the last 6 months? The silence was deafening. Davidson felt the floor shift beneath him. In Texas, only one party has to consent to being recorded, Kesha said calmly. Every Tuesday for 6 months, I recorded you admitting to discriminatory practices while you thought you were talking to a waitress. Tony returned with the phone. Kesha hit the recorder, and Davidson's voice echoed throughout the restaurant. The idea is to never record that it's about race. You document other things: tardiness, productivity, cultural fit. Davidson reached for the phone, but James stepped between them. I wouldn't do that. 6 months of confessions, Kesha continued. Client names, specific tactics, settlement amounts, all perfectly audible. Davidson's phone rang again. It was his wife. Davidson, what the hell is going on? My sister just sent me a video of you on Instagram humiliating a war veteran. Kesha raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. I posted this video you recorded on your own social media account with some details about my military background that you never bothered to find out. Davidson opened Instagram with trembling hands. The video already had thousands of views. The caption read, her sister just sent me an Instagram video of you disparaging a war veteran. Oh shit, Davidson muttered. I'll send you one, Kesha said, showing him a folder on her phone. It's funny, Kesha told James during one of their weekly visits. I spent 3 years hiding who I was, and now I can't hide it even if I wanted to. You know what I realized? Kesha said during an interview for a National Veterans Rights podcast. That respect shouldn't be something you have to earn with medals or a uniform. It should be automatic, universal, human. James eventually moved to the city, opening a small consulting business for veterans transitioning to civilian life. He and Kesha developed a strong professional partnership, helping other former service members navigate the challenges of the corporate world. The irony, James reflected during one of their conversations, was that Davidson had tried to use his discrimination to feel superior, but ended up demonstrating his own moral superiority to the world. Kesha's story inspired legislative changes in 3 states, including new protections for veterans from workplace discrimination. She testified before congressional committees, her quiet but powerful words echoing through the corridors of power in Washington. Tony promoted Kesha to assistant manager, but she split her time between the diner and a new job as a consultant to organizations seeking to improve their diversity and inclusion policies. Ironically, many of the companies that sought her out most were former Mitchell and Associates clients desperate to repair their damaged reputations. The best revenge, Kesha said during a speech at a veterans convention, is not to destroy the people who hurt you. It's to create something greater than they could ever imagine, and to do it with such class that they are forced to respect the very thing they were trying to destroy. Davidson occasionally drove through town, driving a used car instead of the BMW he had once bragged about. On one such trip, he stopped at a diner, not to start a fight, but in a feeble attempt to talk to Kesha about misunderstandings and second chances. Kesha greeted him with the same professional courtesy she always extended to him, serving him coffee and taking his order without any change in her voice or demeanor. When he tried to apologize again, she simply said, Mr. Mitchell, what happened between us was not a misunderstanding. It was a revelation of character, yours and mine. The transformation was complete. The woman who had once silently endured humiliation was now sought after by companies, universities, and government agencies to share her expertise on leadership, resilience, and equity. Her scars, once a source of shame and ridicule, have become symbols of courage and sacrifice, inspiring thousands. If this story of transformation and justice touches your heart, Kesha said during her final television interview, remember that each of us has the power to choose how we respond to injustice. We can bow to it, or we can use our inner strength to rewrite our own story. The lesson was clear. Davidson had tried to destroy Kesha, but he had ended up destroying himself. Ka had learned that true revenge isn't about paying back for the harm done to you. It's about achieving a level of success your enemies could never imagine, and doing it with a dignity that forces them to confront their own moral mediocrity.